this might just be the beginning of the collapse of Mark Carney's house of cards. During the election, Mark Carney told Canadians that he owned nothing but cash and personal real estate. He told reporters to look inside themselves for even questioning potential conflicts of interest, while insisting he was fully compliant with the Ethics Commissioner's rules. But after publicly name-dropping a Brookfield-linked nuclear company during the leaders' debate, introducing budget measures benefiting the small nuclear reactor industry, and then facing conflicting committee testimony over his ethics screen, Democracy Watch founder Duff Conacher is now telling Mark Carney to look inside himself and accusing him of breaking the law. Let's take a look.
We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you
Yes.
don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know, because I know you know this. You know that these requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
I understand you might not own any stock directly right now, but I'm talking about in the future. So I just want to come back to this again.
Well, I'm not going to own, just to be clear, sorry if I may, just to be clear, I own nothing now. What I've done is put all my affairs in order well in advance. I own nothing but cash and personal real estate.
So at this point, he kind of sneered at Rosemary Barton, the CBC reporter, and was also repeatedly saying that he's fully complied, he's over-complied. This is key because that means he was already submitting his conflict of interest disclosure to the Ethics Commissioner at the time that he was telling reporters that I own nothing, all I have is cash. But he knew darn well that he had a lot more than that. So he lied to Canadians during the election. That part isn't really in dispute. But the issue is when it came to actually arguing and debating during the leaders' debate, Mark Carney did something very unexpected. He brought up a company that Brookfield actually owned.
Do we have to speed up the development of nuclear power?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We have a major advantage here in Canada. We have uranium. We have big nuclear companies, including Westinghouse, Candu, and others.
So we've talked about this before. Mark Carney name-dropping a company in the middle of a leaders' debate, one that he has a vested interest in. That's a big problem. And it's also a big problem because he's the Prime Minister. In this debate, he is advertising to Canada and the world the direction that he wants to take Canada in when it comes to green energy. And he's advertising to the world that he's going to be sinking corporate or government money into the nuclear industry and small modular reactors. This is what Westinghouse has a large share of. Now, all of this came to a head when it came to the investigation that the Standing Committee on Privacy and Ethics undertook in the fall of 2025. And the Bloc MP, Mr. Theriault, was kind of leading the charge on this specific aspect of the investigation. And there are some interesting questions to Mark Carney's conflict of interest screen administrators, Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard.
In C15, for the budget that was tabled yesterday, there were tax credits for small nuclear facilities that will help and there are only 5, and that includes Brookfield, who owns Westinghouse. Was the Prime Minister a part of that decision, or did you tell him he needed to recuse himself? For those tax credits, it was an important... So the answer is no. Give me a second. My answer is that these changes would impact various organizations, and you're trying to say that it's a political decision with a general application. And so you don't believe that when a political decision has a general scope, well, there won't be a potential conflict of interest or an appearance of one. But when do we go from public interest to private interest? There are 5, and Westinghouse is a part of those 5. So you can say it's of general interest, but there are so few companies that would be impacted. So when do we go from general interest to private interest? Do you not think that there could be a conflict of interest, even if it's of general application? The tax credit applies more generally and goes beyond the nuclear sector. The tax credit applies to different companies that work on renewables.
What Theriault is talking to Michael Sabia here about is because Sabia is the guy that, or one of the guys that is responsible for administering the ethics screen, anything that comes to Mark Carney is supposed to go through these guys, and they're supposed to evaluate it based on this long and complex process that they had to develop, because Mark Carney has over 100 different companies that he's invested in. And they have to evaluate whether or not it's going to be a conflict of interest for Mark Carney. So what Theriault is saying is, listen, did Mark Carney have any discussions regarding this tax break and the budget? Because that's a problem. Because in the budget and in C15, they talk about these tax breaks for small modular nuclear reactors. If you don't believe me, here it is. This is the budget 2025, and here's one of the pages where it actually talks about it. So it talks about specifically the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit would be available as of April 16, 2024 for projects that did not begin construction before March 28, 2023, and expanded eligibility to include systems that produce electricity, heat, or both electricity and heat from waste biomass, and changed the eligibility requirements for small nuclear energy property under the Clean Technology Investment Tax Credit. What Sabia is trying to say is, well, look, the tax credit affects all kinds of clean energy companies. So this is going to be general in application. So he's arguing that it's not a conflict of interest because they're talking about a tax credit that's going to be affecting a bunch of things. And what Theriault was saying is, no. There's different categories here. And the budget specifically talks about changing the eligibility for small modular nuclear reactor properties. So that wasn't just a blanket decision that was made. That was very, very specific. And it says so in Carney's own budget. So Theriault was saying, listen, that should have been a conflict of interest. Why didn't you recuse him from that?
How can you determine whether the screen is appropriately triggered if you're ignorant to what is behind the fund?
Yeah, Mr. Cooper, for the simple reason that we check everything with the Ethics Commissioner.
This is important. Michael Sabia right here is saying we check everything with the Ethics Commissioner. Now, that doesn't mean there's any wrongdoing at this point, but it is going to be very important later. So just remember that.
As I understand it from your testimony, the Ethics Commissioner's office is also available to both sides of the equation.
More than available. I would say that the Office of the Ethics Commissioner is not just available. The Office of the Ethics Commissioner is an integral part of the process.
Here he's responding to Leslie Church, saying that, listen, it's not just me that manages the screen. It's not just Mr. Blanchard that manages the screen. The Ethics Commissioner in his office, they're part of this. They're right in there. So He's trying to say that, listen, we're all aware. We're all aware of what's going on, and we check everything with them, and we're in constant communication with this. Okay.
Yesterday, I asked a question to Mr. Sabia regarding Bill C-15 for the budget that was tabled 2 days ago at the House. I mentioned the tax credits for small nuclear power plants. At page 91, there is a tax credit that existed 2 years ago, but it did not focus on nuclear power plants, but C-15 adds a tax credit for these small nuclear power plants. In C-15, there is also a new credit for clean energy, and that also includes nuclear power plants on page 120. In that area, there are 5 major players, and one of those is Westinghouse that belongs to Brookfield. In your tool, and I looked at this tool yesterday on page 3, it states to those that need to apply it to pay specific attention to Westinghouse, which belongs to Brookfield, correct? Now, when we look at your document, the definition of general application that's on page 5, it states that if the decision has to do with an indeterminate group of people or companies, the matter is of general application. But I don't think that 5 players is indeterminate. NuScale Power, Westinghouse, General Electric Hitachi, Atkins Rillick, and Technic at Home. On page 6, when we want to see whether or not it applies in a general manner, it's if it applies to a small group that is not a large category. And so that's a problem. Why did you not apply the screen? Mr. Sabia gave you the context. In his view, it was a general application and did not require the use of the screen. But I'm asking you the question today. I'm looking at your document. I don't need to repeat the question, I imagine. According to your document, you are not applying this ethics screen when you should have. I respect your interpretation. That's not your interpretation. That's your document.
So this is Marc-Andre Blanchard. This is the other part of Mark Carney's ethics screen. You have Sabia on one side, you have Blanchard on the other, and then you have the ethics commissioner. Those are the 3 parts of this screen. And what Terrio was saying here is very, very important. He's actually looking at the tool, or the methodology, the process by which they're supposed to be executing the screen. They're supposed to follow this. And they're saying, you didn't actually adhere to your document. You were supposed to make sure that he wasn't participating in this. And he did. Now, Sabia, before, you recall, he'll say, well, this is general application, it's affecting a bunch of people. No. Your document, and this is what Terrio is saying, your document says that general application applies to an indeterminate amount of companies. So basically, there's an unknown amount. In this case, there was 5. And there were specific changes made to the tax law that were going to affect these 5 different companies. He lists them. Westinghouse is one of them. So he's saying, you didn't even apply the screen according to your own document. That's not in dispute now, because we know what the document says. Terrio read it. And Blanchard is agreeing with Sabia. So if he's agreeing with Sabia, neither of them followed this document properly.
When I looked into the tool used for this screen, I noticed that there are shortcomings in the application made by Mr. Sabia and Blanchard. For example, with C-15, for the budget bill that was tabled in the fall, tax credits were added that did not exist for small nuclear installations, and there was another tax credit for clean energy that includes those nuclear facilities. In the tool, it is stated that you need to be aware of Westinghouse, and that was at page 3 of the tool. they stated that they hadn't applied the screen because it was a decision of general application. But when we look at the definition on page 5 in that document, it states if the decision has to do with an indeterminate group of people or companies, well, then it is a matter of general application. There are only 5 players for these small nuclear installations.
Okay, so this is important because Theriault is relaying the testimony back to the ethics commissioner, and he's saying, so should Mark Carney have recused himself? Now, if you believe Michael Sabia and if you believe Marc-Andre Blanchard, then this should not be a surprise to the ethics commissioner's office, right? Because they're saying they're an integral part. We're in constant communication. We're talking all the time. We check everything with them. This should not be a surprise. They should know exactly what this is, and they should understand how to respond.
For what I've understood of that tax credit, it's for taxpayers. I had listened to the testimony by Mr. Sabia, and so it would be of general application for those nuclear plants. Well, he's wrong. There was a tax credit that was created for these small nuclear power plants and a new tax credit for clean energy, which did not previously include these power plants before. So we're not talking about a small indeterminate group here. It is, in fact, quite determinate. There are 5 players with Brookfield and Westinghouse. There are only 5 companies, yes, who can. I could name them if you'd like, but I believe that the screen should have been applied to Mr. Carney at that time because there's a direct link with his blind trust. This is a budget bill, so should he not have recused himself from the vote on C-15? You have made reference to many things regarding the nuclear industry and these small nuclear plants. I won't be able to respond right now, but you can write the question to me and I would give you a response.
First, the first person who answered on behalf of the ethics commissioner, someone from his office, sounds like he thought this was the tax credit for, the 12 million Canadians or however many that they want to, keep talking about. So he doesn't understand that this tax credit is for not taxpayers, but for companies. So that's the first part. And the ethics commissioner sounds completely confused. That's what's going on. It's like, okay, so you're telling me all this stuff. I don't really know what you're talking about, so I'm going to have to take that and go back and figure this out. Well, wait a minute. Michael Sabia and Marc-Andre Blanchard are trying to tell us that they talk to you on a day-to-day basis, that they're in constant communication with you, that they check everything from you. This shouldn't be new. This should be a big one that you should understand. So, what's going on here? I think I'll believe, based on the reaction of these folks, that the ethics commissioner's office had no idea what was going on. And if that's the case, that means Sabia and Blanchard aren't checking with the ethics commissioner on absolutely everything, are they? And this has led Democracy Watch and Duff Conacher to sound the alarm on this and say, no, Mark Carney is breaking the law. This is what their submission says. So this is what Democracy Watch filed, and they filed this on April 15th, 2026. So this is just a couple of weeks ago, folks. From available evidence, very likely Prime Minister Carney has violated the Conflict of Interest Act and broken the law. So they go over what has gone on here. And there's a link in the description of the video. Apologies, there's a lot of links in this video because we used a lot of source material for this. Here's Duff Conacher to break it down. Did Mark Carney break the law here?
In my opinion, he did. He's violated the Federal Conflict of Interest Act, the federal government ethics law, because he knows that he owns shares in Brookfield. They're long-term shares called stock options and deferred shares. He knows he owns them till 2033. He says I put them in a blind trust, but he knows they can't be sold by his trustee, who he handpicked, and so he knows he owns them. And then he at least participated in the vote on the budget. and probably some discussions and debates internally in cabinet to approve the budget bill C-15, which included this tax credit for that applies to Westinghouse as one of a small group of companies, tax credit for building small modular reactors, SMRs as they're known. And Brookfield owns Westinghouse outright. So he's furthered his own interests by participating in a discussion, debate, or vote on a tax credit for a company that is owned by the company he's invested in. It's just a very clear-cut case.
So if it is found that Mark Carney violated the Conflict of Interest Act, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of accusations, a lot of media that has been around this concern. What does that then do? Does it open up to question virtually every single investment that he has and every decision that he has?
It does. It highlights this huge loophole that is allowing him to take part in a whole bunch of policymaking processes that he is allowed to personally profit from because he's invested in the Brookfield conglomerate of companies, which owns the Brookfield as the parent company, owns 2,000 companies, subsidiaries under the umbrella of Brookfield, and just shows the whole absurdity of the current situation.
This is interesting because this all culminates in two scenarios where Mark Carney has actually broken the law. The first is right here when he voted for the budget.
All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Mr. Carney.
Mr. Carney.
And the second is right here when he registered a vote in favor of Bill C-15. So, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress how important this is. Yes, even if Mark Carney was found to have violated the ethics law, is anything really going to happen to him? Not from a financial perspective, no. But what is extremely important here is if he has been found to violate the ethics law on this now calls a multitude of decisions into question, and it casts a completely different light on Mark Carney, and it paints him as somebody that he doesn't want people to view him as. It paints him as somebody that has a lot of conflicts of interest that we may not know about because we found one that he violated. And it calls into question this entire ethics screen, and it calls into question all of the discussions that are going on behind the scenes, and it calls into question the rosy reputation that Mark Carney would like Canadians to view him as. So in short, if he is convicted on something like this, as breaking the Conflict of Interest Act and breaking parliamentary law, this might just be the beginning of the collapse of Mark Carney's house of cards.